Ugh. Ooh, more bass. Turn up those headphones.
He represents the mitten by way of Penn State. When Chapman gets to talking sports, the people can't wait. He represents the mitten, be a true EMU, but cut Dennis in the fall and his veins bleeding blue. They got respect around the state when that light turns red. So don't sleep on these dudes. Just invite your friends to cut your nap short and tip your cap for and sit back for the Fith chapter. Brian Chapman. Dennis Fithian. When they open their mouths, they spit in the facts, bro. This ain't even optional, man. You just have to tune into YouTube to watch the broadcast or download it to your phone to peep the podcast. They mix laughter, they get after. It's all captured in the Fith chapter. That's right. Welcome to the Fith chapter. I am Brian Chapman. He is Dennis Fithian, and we're ready to go for episode number 112. And Dennis, despite all the reports out there, today was a good day to be a Michigan fan because Juwan Howard turned down some NBA offers and he is staying at Michigan. How about that?
I'll take your word for it. It didn't feel like a good day to be a Michigan fan to me.
Well, at least it was a good day to be a Michigan basketball fan. Let's put it that way.
I'll buy that.
In terms of the only sport that most Michigan fans care about, we'll get to that in the first chapter, but definitely want to thank everybody out there for tuning into episode 112. We've got 5 more fantastic chapters for you on this show. And we want to thank everybody who's watching on YouTube, Facebook Live, and Twitch, and to those who are listening to the podcast via Apple, Google, and Spotify. We definitely want to thank those folks who are tuning in. And if you're wondering what we're going to be talking about during tonight's show, we'll get to tonight's book in just a minute, but also want to mention that if you are sending in your feedback, you're sending in your comments, that our intern, Brian Jelinek, will be monitoring that throughout the course of the show.
Ooh.
And so if you want to converse with him, in addition to us, you can do so on Facebook, you can do so on Twitch, you can do so on YouTube. And of course, we might be throwing up some of your feedback during the course of the show right down there so that we can read it and so that our viewers can read it. But if you're wondering what we're going to be talking about on tonight's show, let's take a look at today's book. And there you can see in the second chapter, the college football playoff is considering expanding.
Playoff?
That's right. Expanding to 12 teams as early as 2023. We'll tell you if we think that's a good idea or they should stand pat or perhaps they should alter the 12-team format to something else. In the third chapter, how would this potential expansion affect Michigan and Michigan State football? In the fourth chapter, who poses the biggest threat to the Nets in the NBA? There are 8 teams left. There are 7 non-Nets teams. Could it be the Milwaukee Bambies who play the Nets tonight? And that game is about to tip off in game 3. Is it a Western Conference team? Dennis and I will tell you coming up in the fourth chapter. And in the fifth chapter, we've got the major wager. So definitely want to tune in for 5 more fantastic chapters. As for the first chapter, as we turn the page, we start with a major update on the legacy of Bo Schembechler. Over the last several months, there's been more and more smoke building regarding former Michigan athletics doctor Robert Anderson sexually abusing some of his patients. And people have been wondering just how much Bo Schembechler, a former Michigan head coach, perhaps the most storied and most favorite head coach of all time among Michigan fans, how much did he know about it? And the stories just continue to pile up over the last year about him potentially knowing. And today was a big day because Bo's son, Matt Schembechler, held a press conference with 2 former University of Michigan football players to discuss what they knew about the situation and to discuss their experiences with the situation. And here is a a brief synopsis of what went down at the press conference earlier today, as told by Channel 4 News in Detroit, WDIV. Let me get this queued up in the right position. Uh-oh. There we go.
Clearly knew what was going on.
Yes, precisely, Devin. And it's one of those things where there is no doubt going to be a lawsuit coming out of this. The attorneys who were with them said that. And yes, it's a situation where the two other players, Daniel Kwiatkowski and also Giovanni Johnson, went along with Matt Schembechler, saying that Bo knew. And they say because they had mentioned it to him. Now, in the meantime, it's a situation where Matt Schembechler said that when he was 10 years old, he was molested and told Bo about it back in 1969.
Bo's temper was legendary, and he lost it. He screamed, "I don't want to hear this. I'm not hearing this." I tried to tell him repeatedly, but my effort earned me a punch in the chest. This was the beginning and the end of the relationship with him.
Matt says he moved out of Bo's house at age 18. Doesn't hate Bo, but sure doesn't like him. Matt's story predates the others. Former wide receiver Giovanni Johnson claimed 2 of his marriages failed because of the intimacy issues he wrestled with after Anderson molested him during repeated athletic physicals.
People are saying that Bo didn't know. He did know. And the only way that was going to get out is for me, myself, to come out to let people know he did know. I told him myself. And our relationship from that point went downhill.
Former offensive lineman Dan Kwiatkowski claims Dr. Anderson sexually assaulted him in similar fashion and decided to come forward after seeing in the newspaper people questioning whether Dr. Anderson was really a problem.
I didn't know it was going to turn into this. They were just asking if this guy was messed up, and he messed me up.
Matt Schembechler believes the abuse continued for so long because of a culture that placed the university's reputation over student safety.
Anderson was able to continue this abuse for so long because he was supported by a culture that placed the reputation of the university above the health and safety of the students.
Well, the university wasted no time in putting out a statement. Even before Schembechler's news conference ended, it said, quote, "Our sympathy for all of Anderson's victims is deep and unwavering, and we thank them for their bravery in coming forward. We condemn and apologize for the tragic misconduct of the late Dr. Robert Anderson, who left the university 17 years ago and died 13 years ago."
All right, so that's a brief synopsis of what what took place at that press conference earlier today. And Dennis, the reason this is all a big deal is because much like Penn State loved Joe Paterno, Michigan loves Bo Schembechler, and neither was accused, obviously, of committing the heinous act of sexual abuse or sexual assault, but both, according to a lot of folks, according to just about everybody, should have done more to stop the assailants from doing what they did. So, Dennis, when you look at how Penn State took down their statue of Joe Paterno and how they're not associating as much with him anymore, do you think that Bo's statue needs to go down? Do you think that the Schembechler Hall needs to be renamed? And what else did you take from the press conference earlier today?
Yeah, I think both of those things are going to happen that you mentioned there. And I think the thing today is, we've heard about this now for 15 months. There was a report 15 months ago, and then about a year ago, there was the first time that somebody had came out in the early 70s and linked Bo and said that Bo knew about it. And so there was one person, and, you want to listen to what we've learned over the years. You want to listen to when people come out and they say, that they've been abused here. These are things that are difficult to come forward with. Men, women, after 5, 10, 30, whenever. It is very difficult. So you want to take that seriously. And then recently, about a month ago, we had the Wilmer Hale law firm report. That was Michigan commissioned this report to look into Dr. Anderson. They came back with, they went through millions of documents, talked to hundreds of people, and they came up with the hundreds of alleged abuse in that document, including some of the guys that we saw there today. I thought today, though, was a kill shot for Schembechler's legacy. you have two of the guys that were named in that, or were in that report and talk, but you're able to put a face to them. And then whatever you think about Matt Schembechler, Bo's son, his last name is Schembechler. You get somebody out there saying as a 10-year-old he was abused and told his daddy, and it got him a punch in the chest. I mean, Bo's legacy. I mean, if that's big to people, it's big to people. I get it. You know, Bo's the number one icon in my entire life. So it's not like I'm sitting over here like, you know, all carefree and casually with all of this. But I've tried to remind myself that, you know, as this goes along, Bo's legacy and statues and everything else is really, it's not even secondary. You know, the focus should be on what happened for almost 50 years. And this latest revelation just in the last 2 days by Matt Schembechler, that this happened in 1969. And that's if there's a worst part, I mean, there's a lot of bad, terrible parts about this, but the worst part is that Anderson started there in 1966. This was the earliest. And, according to Matt Schembechler, that, Don Canham tried to fire him, the late AD. And if that would have happened just 2-3 years into his tenure there, just think of how many people that they could have saved from being assaulted. And that's the part that continues on through the 70s, is that, okay, well, this person then said something. Well, they could have done something here. Then they actually did fire him, but the athletic department rehired him just like that. So it's one thing after the other here when it comes down to Anderson and his nearly 50-year run of abuse. But yeah, all those things. Think about the victims and plaintiffs, survivors, whatever you want to call them, instead of thinking about Bo on a day like this.
Yeah, and I remember when we talked about this about a month ago, one of the stories that came out, or one of the anecdotes that came out, was that when Dr. Anderson was hired, the reports about him sexually abusing students started immediately. So if at the first sign of this happening they had fired him, then he would not have gotten his hands on Matt Schembechler. So truly a very sad experience. And you labeled a kill shot. I was going to say it was a brutal development, but I think that your terminology, a kill shot for Bo's legacy, is a better way of describing it. I can tell you that when the Jerry Sandusky scenario was happening with Penn State in 2011, that's 10 years ago, I think it's clear to say that what Jerry Sandusky did was worse than Dr. Anderson, because from what we understand about the situations, Jerry Sandusky was raping boys, so using his own genitalia to penetrate, which obviously is worse than using fingers to penetrate. Both are terrible, but one is worse than the other. That said, when you compare what happened with the two coaches, according to all the reports, Mike McQueary went to Joe Paterno and said, "Hey, this is what I witnessed in the showers." And Joe Paterno didn't punch Mike McQueary in the chest, didn't erupt at him. He apparently passed it on to the Penn State police and the president of Penn State University, and then they dropped the ball. And then obviously Joe Paterno didn't do anything afterwards. I think some would argue that he did what he was supposed to do. A lot of folks would say that he didn't do nearly enough, but that is certainly, you could say, better than screaming at a 10-year-old and saying, "I don't want to hear this," and then socking him in the chest. So from that perspective, you would think that tearing down a statue and renaming the building should happen a heck of a lot swifter matter than would happen with Penn State University, because you could say that Joe Paterno acted with at least some empathy and some concern, but not enough. And if what Matt Schembechler said is true, then there was no concern for him. And on top of that, a lot of folks are more likely to react more forcefully if it's their own son. Now you could talk, it's not his real son, it's his stepson. Like you said, same last name. it was his own son, and he punched him in the chest, where Paterno didn't have a relationship to the kid involved and reported it. So from that perspective, I don't want to make this an entire comparison between the two, but it seems like what Bo did was worse than his response.
Yeah, I'll leave the the degrees of how terrible the sexual abuse was to you and others. I mean, it's terrible, but I think the parallels when I think about it is that Joe Paterno, I don't think there was any question that he loved his players and he loved Penn State football and he loved his coaches. And it's just my guess on Paterno is that I think that he thought, hey, you know what? Jerry Sandusky would never do that. Man, he loves Penn State football. He loves me and he loves, the kids here. He's not going to do anything to put – and coaches, they give their players the benefit of the doubt. They give their coaches the benefit of the doubt. And all of it is, to protect Penn State football. And I think with Michigan, it's the same thing here with Bo. It feels like this. It's like before this Schembechler news conference and, he had some quotes yesterday, so it's about 24 hours old. I wasn't making excuses. I still thought that in the end with this Wilmer Hale report and not one, not two, but up to 4 people telling him over the years in prostate exams, even viewing it through a 2021 lens, trying to go back and do that in the 70s, which is difficult. I did do that, and I went back and in the 80s. I remember when I had my own physical, in high school to play sports and things, and I thought that, I recounted my experiences. And I remember when people would say you'd go to get an experience, you'd say, oh, they're going to tell you to bend over and cough. And I was like, well, bend over and cough, going in there. Well, they did check me for hernias and things, but I don't ever remember any of the other doctors telling me to, bend over and cough and everything. But my point to all this is that I think that if I would have went home and told my dad that, the doctor was a little, he made me uncomfortable. And this was in the 80s. I think my dad, who was a police officer, and, back in the day, people really respected police officers. They really respected doctors. And my dad would have said something like, hey, you know what? Doctors, he's just checking you for things. And, he would have, I don't want to say he would have blown it off, but he would have said, look, that's what doctors do. And even if I would have come back, I think at him and said, hey, but you know what? He went over the line. He's saying, you know what? No, that's doctors. You respect doctors. They're here for your best and well-being.
But he wouldn't have punched you in the chest.
Well, no, he wouldn't have punched me in the chest. And none of that makes at you. And none of that makes, Bo potentially looking the other way or protecting the football program or sending it on down the line and then maybe ignoring it later when he's an athletic director. None of it makes, I'm not giving any excuses. I was just thinking about viewing it through that way. But now, with what Matt Schembechler has to say, there's no viewing it through 2021 and 1969 and all of this that, they think the 10-year-old, could he have, you start just making all kinds of well, maybe Bo, respected the doctor so much that he really thought his 10-year-old son was lying. But I'm not getting into the, it's so difficult for these guys to come forward.
Even if he thought his 10-year-old son was lying, because 10-year-old sons do lie, kids lie. When either before that and certainly after that, you've got player after player after player after player after player saying, hey, Bo, this dude's sticking fingers in me and stuff like that. You might go back and say, well, even if my 10-year-old son lies all the time, sometimes he tells the truth. And perhaps I believe these adult players. And he still didn't do anything. Yeah,
there's little pieces of evidence all over the place that even when, Bo at the tail end, it was interesting how all this time it was always Cannon was the athletic director. And I thought myself, the first person that came out last year, he was a student radio or something. And he said, and he didn't even want anything to happen to Bo, but his story is that he went up to Schembechler, immediately told him this. And he said, Bo told him, go tell Cannon. And you know what? And the guy said that he did, and nothing happened. And I was thinking, you know what? Hey, Bo, maybe all those years talked to his athletic director. His athletic director said, look, I've got this handled. But that, again, that doesn't excuse it. And then when you're the athletic director yourself at the tail end of your career and the guy's still there, that you don't look into it. So none of that, there's not a lot of ground to stand on, even if you're trying to play the, hey, maybe Bo was this and maybe it was a different time that, and what about this? None of it really
And
stands
when it
up.
comes to things like statues and naming a hall, like for me as a Penn State fan, I was one of the first to say, look, the statue's not that big a deal. A lot of my friends at Penn State were saying, oh, we can't take it down. It's Joe Pa. He's such a great guy and all this. He couldn't have done it. I just kept on saying, like, it's a statue. As Rob Manfred would say, it's a piece of metal. And if somehow he gets cleared, then perhaps they could stick the statue back up. But we should not be sitting around here trying to act like the statue is the most important thing. And when you've got this stuff coming out about Bo Schembechler, I don't think that any Michigan, excuse me, any Michigan fans should be sitting there saying we have to preserve this statue. If they take down the statue, if they rename Schembechler Hall, that doesn't mean they're wiping away all of his wins or saying that he was a bad coach, but they're just not honoring him as much because of what he was told, apparently, and what he didn't do. And I think that based on these revelations, unless in a short period of time, preferably by the start of the football season, there is a wave of stories and accounts to contradict all that has happened, not just today, but in the last couple of months, then they should get rid of the statue and they should get rid of the name of Schembechler Hall and perhaps name it after a coach who won a national championship like Lloyd Carr.
Well, I think maybe they should, tap the brakes on doing any naming of anything, here for a little while. And
that's fine too.
Right now, Michigan's they've got rampant sexual abuse cases going on all over the place with their faculty, and then they've got this. So, like, the thing about, the thing about I thought about Bo today is if to try to take it back to the 70s or whatever else, the Bo that I really thought that I knew. If in 2021, with all of this came to light and he really didn't know, I think he would say, you know what, take any statue down. Take my name off because you know what, all of that, I should have known. So I felt that way. And, for people that are like, oh, you're part of the woke or cancel culture. I'm not part of any of that. I take each individual situation one by one. I'm not joining up I'm not in any woke club or any other kind of club. I'm in the club of, what does my conscience tell me? What does my head tell me? And what do I really think is right? And so, everybody that's all about that, you guys are all in some kind of club or some kind of political party that's just ready to stamp all of that out. And you know what? Statues and you're not canceling anything. History's there. Yeah. And they need to learn from it and they need to be reminded about it. If you're thinking that they won't be reminded about it or anything else, put a little plaque up there that says, you know what, there used to be a statue here of Bo Schembechler, but here's why it's not here anymore. This is the building that used to be called Schembechler Hall, and here's why it's not called that anymore.
Yeah, buildings get renamed all the time. I mean,
if you're worried about that, if you're, people are like, you're erasing history, where you're taking down something that you honored somebody that you thought that needed to be canonized, and right now it doesn't seem like that.
Yeah. Taking down a statue does not erase history. Like when you take down a Confederate statue, you take down a Nazi statue or something, that doesn't mean that the Confederate Army didn't lose the Civil War. The Nazis weren't around killing Jews and things like that. That just means you don't want to honor them anymore. Let's say, what kind of feedback are we getting so far, Dennis?
Well, let me see if I have the capabilities to throw some up.
Oh, yeah.
There's the Brian Jelinek. You mentioned him. Good to see him on there and rolling here. Let's go to this one. Tim. Nice to see Tim on there. Good looking dog. He's a Michigan fan, and he lost all respect for Bo.
Yeah. And I mean, when you have a situation like this, it's easy to lose respect. And I think that for a lot of folks, even if you're a huge Michigan fan like Tim is, I think that there's probably a lot of folks out there that say, you know what, the thing that really hits me is the fact that these were not just extraneous football players. This is a member of his family. He was trying to raise Matt Schembechler, and he responded to this serious claim by punching his kid in the chest.
Yeah, here's Beth, saying nowadays someone is in the room when the kid is examined. Yeah, like the things like I was talking about what my dad would have said to me. Like if I have a stepson, if he would have come to me and had an exam and said, hey, look, I thought something was over the line. I don't even think an hour would have gone by. We'd have been down filing some kind of police report, some kind of, making some kind of claim and seeing if we, that's how far we've come, like, hey, yeah, you respect doctors, but you also know that talking about things that you don't think is right, with your family, and it's not keep quiet, toughen up, and it's none of those things. And those things, people didn't talk about things like that in the 70s. But yeah, just with what we've seen from doctors and priests, and I don't know if there's others, politicians probably too in there.
Oh yeah, there's a situation right now. It's not the exact same, but there's what Matt Gaetz is being accused of potentially of paying for sex with a 17-year-old congressman from Florida.
Yeah, I see
politicians.
that.
Throughout the years and the decades, that's just the one that's going on right now. But throughout the years and decades, have been accused of stuff like this.
Yeah, here's Jelinek talking about the major thing about both of them being dead, and that you have to speculate what we thought, that was going on here. Yeah, that is a tough part of it, and that's the one thing that I said, like for Bo, like, you know what, Bo died. He didn't know any of this, whatever. If he didn't have to worry about, but I'm telling you, like, if it really, for the people that are truly believe, like, oh, Bo, and like the Harbaugh said, like, he doesn't believe, like, that would have never been Bo. If he would have known, he wouldn't have swept anything under the rug. Well, if that's really true, the Bo that I would say that if I was Harbaugh, you know what, if Bo really knew this, Bo would say, take down the statue and take down the name on the hall, because he didn't deserve to have it up.
I would say this, and I don't know Bo or anything like that. I can't say, oh, I was coached by Bo or I know that. I would say this: if the story had gotten publicized like it is getting publicized right now, then I would assume he would come out and say, oh, you know what, he's got to go. I don't stand for this. But because it wasn't being publicized, because it wasn't in the age of social media, he could punch his kid in the chest. He could say it's not that big a deal. He could have a fiery outburst and say, let's just move on. I think that the publication of stories oftentimes makes a big difference. Like all the time you hear about people that aren't sorry until they get caught. And then when they get caught, it seems like they're more sorry that they got caught. Like Kevin Durant. This isn't the apples to apples, but Kevin Durant was saying some nasty things to Michael Rappaport, the comedian, and saying, I want to meet you out on the street and beat your ass. And then he, at a press conference, he was asked about it when his comments, his DMs got exposed. And when they got exposed, he didn't apologize to Michael Rappaport, but he did pretty much say, I was sorry for getting caught, by saying this is not the person I want to be represented. So if these accounts had been publicized back in the day, or if these people had been going on 60 Minutes and saying, this doctor did this, and Schembechler just stood there and shrugged his shoulders or got angry at me, then I think that Schembechler might have changed his tune.
Yeah, well, the one I've seen this, like you mentioned, Penn State, and then brought the Michigan State situation up, but that was, something that, played out over, it seemed like, years, but at least a year. But there was an awful lot of victim shaming up in East Lansing. I know it happened in, Happy Valley, and it's the same things going on in Ann Arbor. People, like, when somebody comes forward, it's like, this guy's just looking for a payday. This guy, this Bo's son never liked him. He sued him back in the day. Well, this could be a reason for that. So, you got to back off of the victim shaming.
Yeah. All right. You ready to turn the page to the second chapter?
I am.
Let's do it.
Well, it gets us to college football. It's interesting. A couple month or so ago, they had the minutes or something that they released in some kind of document on a Friday. And like in the fourth or fifth paragraph, and like on page 2 or something, it's like, oh yeah, and we'll be considering a college football playoff, coming up. And everybody's like, wait a second, this is you buried the lead here. I didn't bury the lead this week. They came out and fed it straight up to Heather Dinich and the dude at Yahoo Sports said, Pete Thamel, like, hey, you know what? We're looking to expand in 2023. It's going to happen, but hey, big surprise here. We're looking at this 12-team model, and so that's where we're at, chap. And so what did you start thinking about when you saw that they wanted to go to a 12-teamer?
Well, first off, the details of this 12-team model are the sixth highest ranked conference champions and the 6th highest ranked at-large teams, which would suggest that you're going to have all 5 power conference champions in ACC, Big 10, Big 12, SEC, ACC, and or what am I missing? Pac-12, ACC. Anyway, the Power Five. Plus, you'll get a
SEC.
Okay, SEC, ACC, SEC, Big 12, Big 10, and Pac-12. Those
Big
are the
12.
Power Five. And in addition, you're going to have a sixth conference champion. So that could be the American East. That could be the Sun
A group
Belt.
of five. The group of five is going to get
Group
in.
of five
It's gonna get an
champion
automatic
is
bid.
going to get in. So that could be a team like Cincinnati gets in, and you're going to have 6 at-large teams. And then you also got the top 4 teams getting a bye, and then in the first round, you could call it the wild card round. The 5 plays the 12, and the 6 plays the 11, with the 5 through 8 seeds all having home field advantage. And then in the second round, the 1 through 4 teams don't have home field advantage. It's on a neutral site. Their benefit would be having the bye week. I think that I'm always supportive of expansion, because I thought that when they went from just naming a champion at the end to having a 2-team championship with the BCS, that was better but not good enough. Doubling it from 2 to 4, having 2 rounds was better but not good enough. And for a while, back when it was 2, I said don't just expand it to 4, have it 8. Now they're talking about going to 12. I'm still in favor of something like 8, maybe 10, but I'm not going to complain if they go to 12, because I think that having a 2-round playoff is not a real playoff. If you look at all major American sports, if you look at all other college sports, you don't have a 2-round playoff. You have multiple rounds. If you look at Division II and Division III, they've got 16 teams that make the playoff. So why limit it to 4 teams? And you could argue, why limit it to 8 teams? Why not have those 4 full rounds, which I certainly get it. But I think that what they do by having this 12-team format is they pretty much make everybody happy, or at least they attempt to do so, because people say, well, we have to give all the major conference champions a seat at the table, and there has to be something to winning your conference championship. And obviously they could do that with an 8-team format and then have 3 at-larges. But then there are folks out there that say, well, what if there's a great team like a Boise State? You're just going to leave them out if they don't make it into the at-large? Well, there's your carrot for them. And then you want to make sure that if you have 12 teams in, you're not leaving the 5th or the 6th or the 7th team out of the playoffs. So that leaves you having 6 at-large teams. So I think that, I prefer an 8 or a 10-team format. 12 is not something I'm going to complain about. The one big issue that I have is that if you have a 1 through 4 seed, while you get the bye, which is a huge bonus because you're guaranteed to be in the final 8, you don't get a home field playoff game. If you are a 5, 6, 7, or 8 seed, then obviously your university is going to be raking in much more money. And I mean, think about this. If you're number 3 seed Ohio State, you're not going to trade your seat away. You want that bye week. But meanwhile, you could, number 6 seed Penn State is going to be playing, let's say, number 11 seed Miami with a whiteout in the previous week. And how exciting is that going to be? And then your reward is playing number 6 seed Penn State on a neutral field. You don't get a home field advantage. You get a neutral field. So I think that they should either have home field advantage for 5 through 8 and then home field advantage for 1 through 4 in the next round, as opposed to having all neutral site games. Or maybe they could split the difference by having the number 1 and number 2 seeds have home field advantage in the second round, and the 3 and 4 seeds have a neutral site game in the second round.
Yeah, I think you can figure something out there. What they really need, I think potentially this is just a ruse to get to an 18 playoff, and they just threw this out as a trial balloon to get everybody all fired up and see what they would say, give them something to talk about. I don't even have a problem with that. The NFL did that with the 17-team thing. It's not like they just came out and said, we're going to 17. It'll be in the off season, and all of a sudden, you've got Diana Rossini, the NFL is thinking about going to 17 games. And then, it was months after that, all the debate and everything else. And I think college football may have learned something here. It's like, hey, let's get people talking about our sport. let's leak this out here and let's just see what everybody's saying about a 12-teamer. They might not really be thinking about a 12-teamer, but they're just saying, let's see what everybody else, because you know what? You can sit around talking about, let's get the bowl system in and everything else. You don't even have to do the work. Just throw it out there and just see what the fans think and see what all the media comes up with and say, yeah, but this problem, like I've already said, like a group of 5, when you go to 12 teams, I do think a group of 5 should be able to get in somehow. But I don't know about this automatic bid. Which conference is getting the automatic bid? Is it the one that has the highest rank? So really,
they said it's the sixth highest conference champion. So theoretically, a Pac-12 team that's ranked number 22 and is the highest ranked Pac-12 team could not get in if there's 2 non-Power 5 teams that are ranked higher in their conference champs.
Yeah, well, okay, that sounds good. Like Oregon was ranked 25 this year, and they would have knocked out Coastal Carolina. You would have gotten Cincinnati in this year, but you wouldn't have gotten both of them in.
Yeah, I think that's
true. You get
now,
6.
They are going to be bringing this up for debate in like 3 weeks in July. So this is not just throwing something out there, but I think, like you said, it is good to throw it out there in the media first. It's a lot better than what Rob Manfred does, which is just, we're just putting in bigger bases. We're just putting in a 15-second pitch clock. We're just going to be, limiting the pickoff attempts to 2 in the minor leagues. He just says, we're just doing this. And I think that if he had done what the NFL does or what college football does and says, hey, we're thinking about doing this and then leaking it out, we would have more people against Manfred ball.
Yeah, I hear you. And there's Jelinek talking about more football. And you know what? The one thing that you see here, him talking about Notre Dame too, I thought it was interesting. They said Notre Dame doesn't get an automatic bid. So I was like, all right. Except
from what I saw, Notre Dame, because they're not going to be a conference champion, is ineligible for a bye ever.
Yeah, I like it. That doesn't seem like it's going to be that. It does not seem fair. Is it some kind of power move to get Notre Dame to join the ACC?
Well,
or the Big
I
Ten?
think it is fair because in order to win a conference, you have to win a conference championship game, and Notre Dame refuses to play a conference championship game. So if they go undefeated and they have an ACC slate where they don't have to face Florida State, Miami, or Clemson, and they have to play teams like NC State and Duke and Boston College in their 5 or 6 game slate, and then they have to face like a down USC and a down Stanford team, and they run the table, they shouldn't be rewarded. Because you think about a team like, let's say Wisconsin. Let's say they win the Big Ten and they go 12-1. Not only do they have to go 11-1 in the regular season, they had to beat a Big Ten East champion in order to win the Big Ten by beating Michigan or Ohio State or Penn State or something like that. It's an extra difficult game. And Notre Dame saying, we don't want that. So I think it's fair to say you can get in. You're just going to have to win an extra game if you want to win the championship.
Yeah, I think they'll change that. Mark my words on that. I also think that, it's very likely that they're just putting out this just as a trial balloon and that there will be 8. So I wouldn't get worked up about anything, but, it's fun to talk about any way it goes. I mean, I look back in the Harbaugh era, which has been a disappointment when you look at, of course, they haven't been able to beat Ohio State and they haven't won a bowl game in 5 times, the last 5 bowl games they played in. 2 of the times, 2016 and 2018, they would have been ranked in the top 12 in the college football playoff standing. So it looks like they would have been in 2 times there. So, hey, you don't have to beat. You don't necessarily have to beat Ohio State, and you can get in. And then they're playing in the first 8 there. That would be like a bowl game, and they'd just lose it. So, but maybe if they've been doing how things have gone, it doesn't mean that they would lose it for sure. But
well, speaking of Michigan and Michigan State, let's turn the page to the 3rd chapter, because that's where we want to get to how the college football playoff expansion would affect schools like Michigan and Michigan State. And when you think about their history, Michigan is labeled, their labels themselves the leaders and best, but they have 0 CFP appearances, and Michigan State is quote unquote little brother, but they've been to the CFP and they've scored as many points as Michigan has scored in the CFP, which is 0. So how do you think that expanding the CFP from 4 teams to 12 teams would affect schools like Michigan and Michigan State?
Just getting a little bit more excitement at the end and make them feel like they're part of it, and make just like the group of 5. You're giving them a chance. You're getting the Cinderella story in there. You're being more inclusive. And that's the thing with Michigan that I just pointed out. 2 of those years, even though they're really disappointing, at 16, that was where JT Barrett got the first down. At 18, Michigan were favored. They were favored going down to Ohio State. They gave up 62 points. And, they still would have been in the college football playoff. So it's time. Like, I love the idea that every game means everything and everything else. But since they've started the college football playoff with 4 teams, Alabama and Clemson have been 6 times, and Ohio State and Oklahoma have been 4. Notre Dame's got 2. No other school has more than 1. I mean, that's complete domination. But, so we know who the 4 teams are going to be. Likely going to be for the foreseeable future. It's going to be Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, and Oklahoma. That's what it's going to be. Give me those 4 for the next 5 years, and you can have the field. I'll feel pretty good.
Yeah, and there are times when you'll get a team like a Washington or a Michigan State or an LSU or a Georgia that will get in there. But you're right, those 4 teams have been dominant, and that's why I think that expanding it to 12 teams would be so great for Michigan and Michigan State, because I think it would do more than just allowing them to get in there as a number 12 seed or a number 9 seed and then getting smoked and then moving on. I think this would create a lot more parity in college football, because when you think about those 4 schools, Ohio State, Alabama, Clemson, and Ohio State, Alabama, and Oklahoma, especially if you exclude Oklahoma, seems like all the 5-star recruits, or the majority of the 5-star recruits, go to Ohio State, Alabama, and Clemson. And why is that the case? Because they know that they can go to any school that they want to in the country. And if they want to play in a playoff game, then they'd better go to one of those 3 schools, and you can include Oklahoma in the mix as well. If they expand it to 12 teams, then that means you don't have to go to one of those 4 schools, or even an LSU or a Georgia or a Washington, to go to the CFP. That means a team like Penn State, you can see right there, a team that was the number 5 seed back in 2016, would be able to not only get in if the scenario was there in 2016, but if there's a 5-star recruit that's trying to decide between, let's say, Ohio State and Penn State, they could say, well, I'll have a better chance of playing at Penn State than Ohio State, and I can go to the CFP. If you are a recruit that's trying to decide between Oklahoma and Michigan, you can say, well, there's a better chance that I'll be playing right away at Michigan, and I'll still have a good chance as opposed to a 0% chance to go to the CFP. If you're trying to decide between, maybe you're a recruit from Traverse City and you want to stay home at Michigan State, but Clemson's knocking on your door and they say we can go to the CFP. If Mel Tucker has built his program to the point where they're winning 9 games a year, you might say, hey, if we can just creep up to 10 games, then we're in the CFP. And I think that if you start plucking away 2 or 3 5-star recruits per year from those schools and spreading them around to the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th best teams in those conferences, that will level the playing field, and we will not necessarily see in the Final Four each year when they go from 12 to 8 to 4, we won't necessarily see Ohio State always in, Alabama always in, and Clemson always in, because if they have the best players, it won't necessarily be by a landslide. And a trick play or a coaching decision or something like that could be the difference, or an injury could be the difference in Alabama winning or Alabama losing to a team like Michigan or Michigan State in that 2nd round.
Mel Tucker ain't winning 8 games, 9 games.
Well, he can beat Michigan.
Yeah, that's true. Take it back. All right. Let's move on.
You want to get to some feedback first?
We got to the feedback.
Oh, how about we bring in little Brian Jelinek?
Okay. Oh, there he is.
12 teams is not going to happen, but if it did, I think that would be absolutely incredible. I mean, like you guys saw in my comments, Notre Dame could justifiably get in, but I'm in lockstep with you, Chap. I think that if 12 teams can get in, recruits will get more spread out, and you won't see the same 4 teams every year. That's just all I want. I love the college football playoff, but I hate Dabo Swinney with a passion. I hate Nick Saban with a passion. I can't remember the guy's name in Oklahoma, but I hate him too. Like I need something
Lincoln
different.
Riley.
Lincoln Riley, thank you. I think it'll be great for the sport.
Yeah, I mean, think about if in college basketball, as opposed to having a field of 68, you had a field of 4 or a field of 8. Like Kentucky gets all the recruits anyway, and Duke and North Carolina. But if you knew that you would have no chance of going to March Madness, then if you're Cade Cunningham, you're not going to Oklahoma State. You're going to Duke. And
Exactly.
I think that if you expand it out and you know that you can go on a nice little run and you don't have to be the number 1 team in the country with all the hype going in. You can just be the number 11 or 12 seed. You're not going up against a behemoth that has all NFL starters on their first and second units. They're too deep. Then you've got yourself a shot.
My question is, though, if it's 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 teams, what do we do about the group of 5 schools? Like, is it just 1 or 2 that get in? Like, how many would get in?
Well, according to the proposal that's out there, you got the 5, or you got 6, the 6 highest ranked conference champions, which would most likely be the Power 5 conference champions and the next highest conference champion. And then the next, the final 6 would be at-large teams. I would highly doubt there's going to be a year where you have 2 or 3 at-large teams that make the college football playoff. An at-large team that's one of the top 6, but didn't win their conference championship. But if they get in, then they get in. I'm not in favor of having, just like Dennis is not in favor of just guaranteeing an automatic bid just because you're the 6th highest conference champion, because that team could be, I mean, in an average year, that team is not going to be, ranked number 8 or 10 and 12. That team might barely sneak in at number 23. So you're going to stick the number 23 team in as opposed to the number 11 team in the nation. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. But does the 11 seed ordinarily have a great chance to win the championship? No. So it's just kind of throwing them a bone.
Cincy would have got in last year, and Coastal Carolina would not have, though.
Yeah.
All right, fine. A better way to put it is, how do you choose between like the AAC or the Mountain West or the stuff?
It's the ranking, because the CFP puts
that
out
simple?
their rankings every single week. So it's the 6th highest conference champions. So if there are 2 undefeated non-Power 5 champions, and one of them is Cincinnati and they're ranked number 10, and another one is Coastal Carolina and they're ranked number 17, then Coastal Carolina is not getting in because they weren't ranked high enough.
Okay.
Yeah, there'll be a couple of years there. They'll be standing side by side going into those conference title games, and there you go. Come down to the committee. It's all right. There'll be some bitching.
Right. Yeah.
Good job, Jelinek. We'll talk to you in a little bit.
All right, we'll turn the page now to the 4th chapter.
That gets us to the NBA. And you got the Nets. They don't have James Harden, but they don't look like they need him. They're just rolling roughshod, kicking ass and taking aims here once they get in against the Bucks. So they're playing here tonight. Chapman, the question to you is, who gives the Brooklyn Nets their biggest challenge?
Well, if you just saw me with my mouth agape, it's because I just checked the score. And
Go Milwaukee.
In the second quarter, Milwaukee's up 30-13.
Wow.
30-13. So we're sitting here. Let me put the questions up so everybody can see. We're posing the question: who's poses the biggest threat to the Nets? And if you were just tuning in tonight to the NBA playoffs, you would say, well, obviously it's the Milwaukee Bucks, it's the Milwaukee Bambies, because they're stomping all over the Nets and they're digging their antlers into the Brooklyn Nets. Because I've been doing this show, I obviously have not seen a single second of tonight's game 3. I'll be tuning into that once our show ends. But I don't trust the Milwaukee Bambies. They got the benefit of no James Harden in game 2 and no James Harden in the final 48.5 minutes or 47.5 minutes of game 1, and they still got curb stomped. So, I mean, maybe the Bambies win game 3, maybe the Brooklyn. I mean, unless I find out that the reason for this big lead is because Kevin Durant got hurt or Kyrie Irving got hauled off in a stretcher, which, given their injury histories, is certainly possible. I'm assuming that the Nets are going to bounce back, maybe even in tonight's game, but certainly to win this series in 4 or 5. But I don't consider the Bambies to be a real threat. I look at the 76ers, who are my initial pick to win the East, and I don't think they're getting past the Hawks, even though Embiid is healthy right now. He could get hurt again in game 3 or game 4. And if the Hawks do what I think they're going to do and beat the 76ers, they got Trae Young, but only one superstar is not going to be enough to beat the Brooklyn Nets. They got a nice little supporting cast, but Trae Young needs more help. And that takes you then to the Western Conference. The Nuggets have no chance because they don't have their second leading scorer in Jamal Murray, and they lost game 1 of the Utah Jazz. The Clippers are looking better in their last 3, even though they lost to the Jazz in game 1. And I meant the Nuggets lost to the Suns. But I think it really comes down to the Jazz and the Suns, the top 2 seeds in the West. And I would say the Jazz have the best chance to beat the Brooklyn Nets. I like their 3-point shooting a lot. I think they set the record this year in the NBA for most 3-pointers made by a team, or either that or most by per game. I don't know. I mean, it seems like it'd be crazy that they would break that record with 10 fewer games played, even though there were an insane amount of shots from beyond the arc this year. But I like the Jazz because of that. They obviously have the star player that you would need to go up against the Brooklyn Nets and Donovan Mitchell, a guy who could go off for 40 points in any game. They don't have another superstar, but they've got a guy in Rudy Gobert who won the Defensive Player of the Year once again. And when you think about some of the role players for the Brooklyn Nets, like Bruce Brown or Blake Griffin trying to go into the paint to make some moves, to score some buckets, it's going to be a lot more difficult going up against a guy like Rudy Gobert, who can affect the game in so many ways. And so I think that when you add that, when you look at Clarkson, Angles is not the best group of guys you could have going up against the Nets. And I think that if the Nets are healthy, they're still going to beat the Jazz. But having that defensive presence, having that superstar player in Donovan Mitchell, and being able to shoot threes from so many different spots is huge. Their biggest X factor, though, is home court advantage. They have home court advantage throughout the playoffs because they have the best record in the NBA. They were 31-5 at home this year. That was the best record in the NBA. They've got the elevation. It's not Mile High Stadium, but it's 4,200 feet above sea level, so 1,000 feet below what it is in Denver. So the altitude probably plays a big factor when teams go to Salt Lake City and lose. I think that that home court advantage, having those crazy fans there, having some racists in the crowd who are not going to be very nice to James Harden or to Kyrie Irving. And I mean, it's what can you do? The racism is there in Utah. We've already seen it throughout the playoffs. I think that all those things are going to benefit the Jazz and give them the best shot to take down the Nets.
Yeah, this is a tough one because you go through each team. I came out with thinking that it's the Suns. Because of the way their big three are playing. Like Ayton, he can match up a little bit, give him some problems down low. And the way Paul and Booker are going, I think that can happen. I think that I picked originally the Clippers, and Kawhi, get him to the finals, a 2-time finals MVP. You start thinking about it. And really, before tonight, I was going to make a case for the Bucks. I mean, like you say, all right, who is really the best player in there, after Kevin Durant? I think you start going to Giannis and his supporting cast there. It's not too bad. Middleton he's not had he's not done well these first 2 games. He's been ripped on left and right. But I think that Drew Holiday, Lopez, I still think that they could get into the series. I think it is out of the teams that are remaining in the East. I still think it is Milwaukee that will give them the toughest time. And I know you just made the case for the Jazz, but I was going between the Clippers and the Suns, and I came up with the Suns a lot because of the big trio there.
Yeah, the thing about the Suns is, like, a lot of people have been talking about how they've played this great defense and they've allowed the fewest points per game since the playoffs have started, and that's true. But like a lot of folks also like to say, "Who have you played?" And they played the Lakers, but did they really play the Lakers if Anthony Davis was not 100% and was only playing half the series? Did they really play the Lakers if LeBron James was not 100%? So that wasn't a true Lakers team. And now they're playing the Denver Nuggets, so they're playing the the MVP, but Jamal Murray isn't there. So you're playing a team that doesn't have a legit backcourt threat. As a matter of fact, through 2 rounds, they're not playing a team that has a superstar backcourt threat. And then you could go to the finals and have to face off against Irving and perhaps even James Harden as well. I mean, look, there isn't a great answer here, which is why we pose the question: who's the biggest threat to the Nets, as opposed to who's the biggest threat to some other team. The one thing that concerns me is, the Suns are winning, but they're playing these depleted teams.
Yeah, I was checking. If you're watching on Facebook or you are on YouTube, you can send your feedback in. I'm looking now; some of these feedbacks aren't coming through. So I see Bart was asking when are we going to hit on the U of M stuff, and I was informing him that that happened already in Chapter 1. So I'm telling him to check out Chapter 1.
Yeah, you can go back and rewind to take a look at that. That's for certain.
Yep. Well, there we go. There's the feedback, and I think those are the ones I tried to see if my own would come through. So maybe I'm just not doing it the right way.
There it is. I agree with Fithian. Says
right.
Dennis Fithian. Shocker.
I just wanted to see if it was going to work.
Yeah. Also from Jelinek, Brooklyn plus 136 of the tip. Fart noise. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we see he has not been doing great picking the NBA. I have to admit that on Tuesday, I told everybody because of the sticky substance scandal, if I was, considering myself a gambler, that I would have hit the board last night on all the Major League Baseball teams. It's such a controversy. That's all anybody was talking about. Yeah, I hit the board on all the overs, and I went through, but I would have been 2 games. I would have been 2 games under on that, whatever the number ended up coming out. So I would have been a loser if you had hit the board and took my advice on just going with all of the overs. So, and if you're a gambler, you can't be shy. If you really think this is going to be, you got to go ahead and go again tonight. But I don't know.
Yeah, it's just one day.
Yeah, just one day. So, maybe they come back in the next 4 or 5 days in a row. You win with them going over. So maybe you have to test it for a week. Maybe I'll see if I can get that monitored.
All right, let's turn the page then to the 5th chapter for the major wager then.
And while I considered when I was looking at it before I looked at the series switching back to Milwaukee, I thought, I like Milwaukee here. That's going to be my pick tonight. And then I looked and I had to give up 3.5 points. I'm like, I don't want to give up 3.5 points. So I went away from that game. So I am going to the Clippers. And I am I'm going to take that money line on the Clippers, which is I get plus 130. That's the direction I'm going to go. That's a game 2, I believe.
Yeah, that's the second game tonight. All right, well, I don't like that bet, but I mean, if Paul George shows up, they got a shot. Paul George, he calls himself playoff P. What was he, 4 of 17 in game 1?
I like it better now that you don't like it.
Well, but the Clippers lost by what, 3 points in game 1, right? Yeah, because matter of fact, I know because the Jazz were up by that huge number, and then they ended up only winning by 3, which is a push because they were 3-point favorites, and I was kind of pissed off. But if Paul George has an okay game as opposed to 4 of 17, they beat the Jazz.
True.
Whoa.
I think he's going to bounce back. Playoff Paul.
Yeah, I would hope so if you're making that bet. On Tuesday, I went with Marco Gonzalez to get over 4.5 strikeouts, using my model for predicting strikeouts, and it was terrible because I forget the number, but he only had 2 or 3, so that was way off. I'm not going to go back with a strikeout pick now. I tweeted this out earlier today, so you can check it out. But I was really bold with and really high on the Brooklyn Nets to take out the Milwaukee Bambies, and like we were talking about, the Bambies were 3.5-point favorites. And if we could put that tweet by that comment by Jelinek back up there. He says Brooklyn is now down 30. It's supposed to be 32-26, not 26-32. So that's good move. That's good news because it's moving in the right direction. It was 30-13. So now it looks like Bambi's starting to act like Bambi. But I was so bold and I was so high on the Nets going out and curb stomping the Milwaukee Bambies, or pulling out the bow and arrow and netting a Bambi, that I didn't just take the points. I didn't just take the money line. I used an alternate spread, which you can do if you go into your sports betting apps. And I took the Nets -7.5 at +310. So that means if you bet, let's say $50 and your bet's a winner, you make a $155 profit. And given that comment that little Brian Jelinek just put up there, that the Nets have cut a 17-point deficit to 6, suddenly my bet at -7.5 is looking a heck of a lot better.
Let me get a live line.
A live line of the game.
Yes.
Pulling it up.
Maybe I'll just bet it.
Open up your app.
See if I can do it. Did you get a new app? Did you get a new app?
I'm all in.
Download a points bet.
The live line for Brooklyn and Milwaukee, if my phone would load.
Plus 185.
I got plus 180.
Yeah, and if you're looking at the live point spread, it's Bucks -5.5.
Yep.
So with it being a 6-point game and it's a 5.5-point spread, the Nets going to be 1 point better than the Bambies for the rest of the game? I would say yes. So there's another piece of advice for the major wager. If you want to do a live bet, I'd say there's good value on the Brooklyn Nets to win, and certainly good value on the Brooklyn Nets +5.5.
What about the Tigers rolling, man? You got that victory today. Here we come. White Sox, watch out.
You know, from a major wager perspective, I have not been betting on Tigers games very much over the last month because they have not been a reliable L. They had been for the first month of the season, but for this last month, they've obviously been winning more games than they lose. They won another game today. They almost won a game yesterday if it wasn't for that left fielder Robin Isaac Paredes of the home run. But it's at the perfect time with the ballpark opening up and on Tuesday only getting 8,000 fans. They are not a reliable L.
Speaking of L's, I want to run something by you guys. What about renaming the professional football team the Ions? Ions.
Just take the L out of it.
Well, people got all upset because they got an L on their team. You know, the league or whatever it was, whoever made the hats, they put all of the first initial of the mat, but everybody got up some Colin Cowherd and said, "Look how stupid they are! They got a big L on there." Exactly. So everybody got mad. Like, stop, hitting up.
They need to put an S and an O right next to it.
Well, either add the S or the O or drop the L. One of the two.
Mel Tucker's going to the college football playoff before Jim Harbaugh.
All right, that's going to do it.
As who's assistant?
That's going to do it for the show. Thanks to Brian Jelinek, and that was him right there. And to Brian Chapman. I'm Dennis Fith. There's the close-up. That'll do it. We will talk with you coming up on Tuesday. Have a great weekend. Thanks for watching.